This is screencast number 1 for Unit 9, Lesson 3. I'm on page 524, and we're going to take a brief look at the ecology of freshwater and estuary ecosystems. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe the ecological relationships that occur in freshwater and estuary ecosystems. All right, join me on page 526. What are the major types of freshwater ecosystems? Well, first you need to know that freshwater ecosystems take up only about 1% of the Earth's surface. These ecosystems all have water with a salt concentration of less than 1%. Freshwater ecosystems can include lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and wetlands. Remember, most of the water on the Earth is saltwater, not freshwater. So we're just talking about freshwater ecosystems right now. Those found in lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, wetlands. Okay? Wetlands are areas of land covered by freshwater for all or part of the year. Like lakes, the water in wetlands is mostly still. Look very quickly at number 5. Label the major types of freshwater ecosystems shown in each photo. In the first photo, that is going to be either a lake or a pond. The water is really not moving. The second photo, that's going to be a stream or a river. The water is obviously moving fairly quickly. And then the third photo, the one all the way to the right, that is a wetland area. Okay. Abiotic factors that affect freshwater ecosystems would be temperature, water depth, water flow rate, meaning how fast is the water moving, light levels, and oxygen levels. So let me talk just briefly about that. Temperature, how warm or cold is the water? Water depth, how deep is the water? Water flow rate, how quickly is the water moving? Light levels. As you go deeper into water, less and less of the sunlight penetrates through. You eventually, for instance, especially in oceans, you get to a depth where you're so deep that the sunlight doesn't reach it anymore. Okay, so light levels is talking about how much sunlight is able to reach into a certain body of water. And then oxygen levels, how much dissolved oxygen gas is there in the water for plants primarily to, for animals primarily to use. How much dissolved gases are there that organisms need. All right, on page 527, where are examples of freshwater ecosystems found? Lakes and ponds are found where depressions in land fill with rainwater or water from springs. Some lakes are so small that you can walk around them. Others are so big that they are the size of an entire state, etc. Rivers and streams can start from small springs or melting snow in the mountains. This river runs downhill. Water is always going to run downhill, and forms channels of flowing water. Wetlands are often found where underground water is near the surface, and water levels change over time in wetlands. Okay, examples of freshwater ecosystems. Where are freshwater ecosystems found? Well, basically, we're going to categorize our freshwater ecosystems into 3 parts. Those freshwater ecosystems that are found in still water, like lakes and ponds. Those found in areas where the water level changes, okay, your wetlands. Okay, bogs, marshes, fens, and swamps are all types of wetlands. And remember that wetlands are areas of land that are covered with water. They have changing water levels due to climate, weather, and location. Wetlands are very productive ecosystems, which means they have a large amount of living matter per unit area. There's a lot of biodiversity. There's a lot of species living in wetland areas. Okay. All right, so you have freshwater ecosystems that are in still water, freshwater ecosystems that are in wetland areas, and then we also have freshwater ecosystems in moving water, and moving water would be things like rivers and streams. Rivers and streams are ecosystems with moving freshwater. These ecosystems can have both deep and shallow parts. Snails, moss, and some fish live in deeper, slow-moving parts of rivers or streams. And strong-swimming trout, some insects, live in shallower, faster-moving parts of rivers and streams. Okay. Number 9, you're looking at a wetland ecosystem, and it's asking you to identify the producers and consumers in this wetland ecosystem. The dragonfly is going to be a consumer. The great blue heron is going to be a consumer, because remember, consumers have to eat something else for its energy, has to eat another organism. The alligator is going to be a consumer, and so is the black vulture. The vulture can also be categorized, remember, as a scavenger, but that's... in some people's book, that's a type of consumer. Shrubs and the non-woody plants, those are your producers in this particular ecosystem. All right, we mentioned briefly different types of freshwater ecosystems, and now we're going to talk about estuaries. An estuary is a partly enclosed body of water where a river flows into an ocean. In an estuary, nutrient-rich river water mixes with salty ocean water. The mixing causes salt levels in an estuary to rise and fall over time. The nutrients and salts in estuaries cause them to be very productive ecosystems. There's a lot of biodiversity again. Plants such as seagrass, eelgrass, marsh grass, and mangroves can live in estuaries. So can animals such as certain fish, shrimp, clams, crabs, and ducks. Okay? Many organisms use estuaries for nesting and breeding. Okay, some estuary systems that you might be familiar with is the Galveston Bay system in Texas. Not the part right around Galveston Island, but the Galveston Bay area. Okay, and then the Chesapeake Bay system in Maryland and Virginia are also, that's another major estuary in the United States. Okay, let's look at page 531. What abiotic factors affect an estuary? Well, some of the same abiotic factors that affect freshwater ecosystems also affect estuaries. These include temperature, water depth, light levels, oxygen levels, and water flow rate. Because estuaries are found in coastal areas, they are also affected by tides. Tides cause daily changes in water levels. They also cause changes to salt levels in the water. So what are your big abiotic factors that are really in play in an estuary? That would be number 1, changing salt levels. That's the first red heading. And number 2, changing water levels, which is the second red heading. So now we're on page 532 and 533, and we're looking at feeding relationships in a freshwater ecosystem. We're looking at a food web on page 533. It is similar to the food web that we saw in lesson 2. Obviously, it's not the same food web. The organisms are different, but it's, a food web's a food web. They all are set up basically the same way. So the organisms are listed in the table: algae, freshwater snails, flatworms, mayflies, trout, bank swallow, and grizzly bear. Okay, and we need to figure out who are producers, consumers, hosts, parasites, predators, and prey. Okay, again, they remind you that if you have an overlapping circle, that shows a parasitic relationship. This flatworm is a parasite that feeds on the freshwater snail in this case. Okay. All right, making up the base of the food web are the producers. In this case, it's going to be algae. Okay, algae is eaten, in this case, by the mayfly and freshwater snail. So algae is your producer. Freshwater snail is going to be a consumer. Since it's also got a parasite hanging on it, it's also a host. Also, the snail is prey because the trout may eat the snail. Okay. The snail, however, eats only algae, so we're going to consider the snail a herbivore. The flatworm is a parasite that feeds on the snail. Okay, so we're going to list it as a parasite. The mayfly is an insect we can classify as a herbivore. Okay, so it's a type of consumer that only eats plant matter, so it's a herbivore. And it's also prey because the trout and the swallow both will eat the mayfly. Trout is a carnivore because it's eating other animals. Okay, it's a consumer. What kind of consumer? It's a carnivore. It's also a predator because it is going to hunt and eat the mayfly and the snail. But the trout is also prey because the grizzly bear can come along and eat the trout. The bank swallow is a carnivore. So what type of consumer? Carnivore. And really, if we wanted to get picky, we might call it an insectivore because it's eating insects. But we're just going to worry about calling it a carnivore. It's a predator because it's hunting other animals. Grizzly, it's a consumer. What kind? It's a carnivore. And it's also a predator because it's hunting other animals. Okay. Just remember, in any food web, your arrow points to who is doing the eating. The arrow goes to the eater. So the arrow points to the mayfly, so the mayfly has eaten the algae. The snail has eaten the algae. The flatworm has eaten or has gotten nutrition from the snail. The trout eats the mayfly. The bank swallow eats the mayfly. The grizzly bear eats the trout. Okay? Just remember how you're going to decipher the feeding relationships in any food web. All right, so on the back of Lesson 3, I wrote some notes just to kind of make sense of all of the information and get it organized to where it's in a usable format. So freshwater ecosystems, only about 1% of Earth's surface is covered with fresh water. Freshwater is water that has a concentration of less than 1% salt. Okay, very low salt concentration. Abiotic factors that are going to affect freshwater ecosystems include, but are certainly not limited to, okay, temperature, water flow rate, meaning how fast is the water moving, water depth, oxygen levels, how much dissolved oxygen is there in the water, amount of light, okay, and then it goes into several types of freshwater ecosystems. Okay, freshwater ecosystems that are still water ecosystems basically are your lakes and ponds. Basically, the water doesn't flow or move very much. You have freshwater ecosystems with changing water levels. Those are your wetlands, bogs, marshes, swamps, that kind of thing. And then you have freshwater ecosystems with moving water, rivers and streams. And then number 4, it's not really a freshwater ecosystem, but it's not a ocean water ecosystem either. Estuary is sort of something in between. An estuary is where a river flows into an ocean, and the water is saltier or more salty than freshwater, but it's not as salty as ocean water. Okay. And remember, we had 2 special abiotic factors that we really needed to consider when we talked about estuary. And that was changing water levels because of tides and things like that, but also changing salt concentrations. Because, again, it's where the freshwater and the ocean water are starting to mix. Okay, and that's what this is down here. Special abiotic factors affecting estuaries, changing salt levels and changing water levels. Oops. But you can't see that because I didn't move my little thingamajig up. There you go. Okay. And I'm going to stop and add a little bracket right here just to remind you that these are your wetlands. Okay, so the magical bracket has appeared, and so just make sure you get these written down.